on Friday morning. Cloudier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still windy here with further showers in the far north. But even those showers ease away on Saturday as high pressure builds from the south. We're going to see sunny spells for most, and it's going to feel warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, you're with GB News and me, Alex Phillips, and joining me is Liam Halligan.
We're continuing our coverage of Sue Gray's Partygate report, of course, but first, let's get those GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister says he's humbled and he's learnt a lesson following the publication of Sue Gray's report into lockdown parties at Downing Street and Whitehall. The 37-page document, which contains photographs, highlights a number of events where alcohol was consumed excessively until the early hours of the morning. Staff witnessed behaviour which concerned them, but they felt they were unable to raise it with their superiors. The report also found that security and cleaning staff were treated with a lack of respect. Boris Johnson denies deliberately misleading Parliament and maintains he did not personally witness any rules being broken.
It's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules and they fell foul of the rules. I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the Sue Gray report does not vindicate the Prime Minister. It condemns him.
For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in Number 10. And it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt.
Well, earlier, the focus of Prime Minister's questions had been the cost of living crisis. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of choosing to save himself rather than the country.
The reality is that every day of his dithering and his delay, £53 million has been added to Britain's household bills. Whilst he's distracted trying to save his own job, the country has been counting the cost. But complacency is nothing new for this government. Back in October, the Chancellor delivered a mini-budget that has to be reread to be believed.
The Prime Minister hit back, saying his government's working to help households during the squeeze.
Completely wrong about this country's growth performance, Mr. Speaker. He runs it down. He runs it down. He was proved wrong about COVID. He's going to be proved wrong again.
Well, the Chancellor is expected to unveil a multi-billion-pound plan to help struggling families through the cost of living crisis tomorrow. A new windfall tax on energy firms could be used to fund the package after the energy regulator Ofgem warned the energy price cap could rise by a further £830 in October. Let's look at some other news now. A woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a one-year-old boy she was hoping to adopt. Laura Castle reported that Leyland James Corkill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died the following day from catastrophic head injuries. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. A GP who sexually assaulted his patients for over 3 decades has been jailed for 12 years. Krishna Singh was convicted of abusing 47 women from 1984 to 2018. The 72-year-old's victims include pregnant women, a rape survivor, and 4 girls under the age of 16. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register. The Foreign Secretary says the government wants to remove the customs bureaucracy from the Northern Ireland Protocol rather than scrap it completely. Speaking in Belfast, Liz Truss said the UK is open to talking with the European Union, but warned the issue can't be delayed any longer. She added that the UK has practical solutions to ease frictions to protect the single market and the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, I think everybody in Northern Ireland recognises there are issues with the protocol that needs to be addressed. We're not talking about scrapping the protocol. What we're talking about is fixing the issues so that we can protect north-south trade whilst at the same time making east-west trade easier. And my preference, as I've said, is to get a negotiated solution with the EU, but we simply can't allow this situation to drift.
In the US now, at least 19 children and 2 teachers have been killed by a teenage gunman in Texas. The 18-year-old suspect, named by authorities as Salvador Ramos, opened fire at a primary school in Uvalde. He was shot dead by an officer at the scene. Authorities believe he acted alone, but his motive isn't clear. President Joe Biden, who's ordered flags to fly at half-mast until sunset on Saturday, says Congress must pass new gun laws.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? 10 years since I stood up at a high school in Connecticut, a grade school in Connecticut, where another gunman massacred 26 people, including 20 first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Since then, there have been over 900 incidents.
The RMT union is warning that the UK is facing its biggest rail strike in modern history after its members overwhelmingly voted in favour of industrial action. The strike could cause major travel disruption, but the RMT has told GB News the action won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. The union's Senior Assistant General Secretary, Eddie Dempsey, says rail firms have made millions during the pandemic and his members need a pay rise.
So our members, some of them are now in the 3rd year of a pay freeze. Inflation, RPI is at 11.1% now, and this is the biggest cost of living crisis people are saying since records began, and they're feeling the pinch. They regard themselves as having worked extremely hard during the pandemic in difficult circumstances to keep the country moving, and they feel now that they're being betrayed.
The government has approved the sale of Chelsea Football Club, saying it's satisfied the full proceeds will not benefit Roman Abramovich. The billionaire had been sanctioned over his links to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, last night, the Premier League approved the £4.25 billion takeover by a consortium led by the co-owner of the LA Dodgers. The government says the money will be used to help victims of the war in Ukraine. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex and Liam.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips and Liam Halligan on GB News.
We're continuing our coverage of Sue Gray's report into parties held in Downing Street and across Whitehall. Let's get the latest from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. Darren, for new viewers and listeners joining us near the top of the hour, just give us a summary. The Sue Gray report's come out. There's a debate going on in Parliament ahead of a press conference by the Prime Minister in an hour or so's time.
Yeah, indeed, Liam. And in fact, actually, the Prime Minister's just wrapped up that statement in the Commons. I suspect he's probably going to leave Parliament in the next couple of minutes, head back to Downing Street. As you say, we're expecting to hear again from him, being questioned by journalists at around 3:30. Of course, bringing you that live here on GB News. Let's look, first of all, at Sue Gray's report. There is no doubt that it is damning of what happened inside Downing Street over those 18 months, much of that time when we were effectively in lockdown, told not to go outside, not to mix with others, not to socialise, and yet you read what happened inside Downing Street and Whitehall, and it is a pretty brazen breaking of the rules, talking about how one of those parties went on to 4:30 a.m, how there was red wine spilt on the wall, how there was excessive drinking, and this was a repeated feature of Sue Gray's report, minor altercations between members of staff, a lack of respect, and I think this is quite crucial, to many of the cleaners and custodians inside Number 10 who frankly knew the rules were being broken and were trying to stop people from doing so, and they were either shouted down or ignored. The Prime Minister demanding that they are apologised to by those members of staff, and also a sense that even the people breaking the rules knew that they were doing wrong. We know there was one email published by Sue Gray from Martin Reynolds. He was the Prime Minister's principal private secretary, who at one stage said, "We seem to have got away with it." Again, that sense that they knew what they were doing was wrong. Sue Gray, in the end, saying that the events that she investigated should never have been allowed to happen, that the senior leadership at the centre, both political, i.e. the Prime Minister and other senior politicians and officials, must bear responsibility for this culture. Many will be dismayed, Liam, she says, by the behaviour of this kind that it took place at the heart of government. The public have a right to expect the very highest standards of behaviour in such places, and clearly what happened fell well short of this. So it is a damning report, there is no doubt about that. It has done damage, undoubtedly, to the Prime Minister. His defence is essentially that some of these events he attended were for a very brief period of time. He viewed them as work events. He wanted to say goodbye and thank you to senior members of the staff that worked very hard during the pandemic, but also that much of this behaviour that I've just gone through took place when he wasn't there. Either he had left or it took place when he wasn't even in Downing Street at all. And I think in the end, even though he's been fined by the police, even though he is the first Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law while being Prime Minister, I think in the end, many MPs, many Conservative MPs, while they've got reservations, while they're not terribly comfortable with all this, not very happy at all with the Prime Minister, they do want to move on. They want to end this decibel, and they want to focus on other things like the cost of living crisis. And that's why I suspect that even though we've been told to wait for the Sue Gray report for months, in the end, I think most Conservative MPs will say that we do need to move on, that the Prime Minister shouldn't face a vote of confidence, and that his job is safe. And in the end, it'll also be up to you, I, and the members of the public watching this to make our decisions about what we think went on and about what we think the Prime Minister did, and indeed what he told MPs. But I think politically, at least for the time being, the Prime Minister is pretty safe.
Darren, thank you ever so much. Well, we're joined now by Tom Slater, who is editor of Spiked, and former Conservative Minister Edwina Currie. Edwina, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, do you think Boris Johnson simply saying, "I wasn't there," is enough? When it seems to me one of the main people in coordinating a lot of these gatherings was Martin Reynolds, who was his personal private secretary.
Oh, yeah, if Martin Reynolds had ever worked for me, I think he'd have been out of the door. PDQ, I think the idea of a very senior civil servant actually issuing invitations for parties and saying things like, I think we got away with it. That is outrageous, outrageous. I'm not going to defend anything that went on. Let me cut your questions short, if I may, Alex. I'm not going to defend anything that went on. It was outrageous. But there's very little that's new in this report. We can read the emails and the WhatsApp and so on, and perhaps quite enjoy doing that. But in the sum total of things, you know, it's May 2022. It doesn't matter anymore. It's done. It's dusted. And vastly more important matters are on the Prime Minister's desk, and I would much prefer the Cabinet to be paying attention to those.
Tom Slater, you work for the website Spiked. I mean, as Edwina Currie says, we know a lot of what was already in this report. Martin Reynolds, Alex mentioned the principal private secretary who wrote that email saying we might have got away with it. He resigned anyway back in February. It seems a lot of the sting's been taken out of this, certainly among people in the Westminster Village, even though there will be people around the country who remain furious, incandescent, given what they went through during lockdown, given the rules that they adhered to.
Oh, definitely. But I think they'll have already made their minds up about Boris Johnson and about this whole Partygate scandal. We've known about the worst of it for a very long time, the garden party at the height of lockdown, you know, where they just announced you can meet one person outside. People remember this, but I can't be the only person who was looking at this 6 months into this inquiry, into these various investigations now, and thinking that this just needs to stop. I mean, it's quite clear that Boris Johnson isn't going to resign. It's quite clear that his MPs have given him a stay of execution because they've got no viable alternative, and the public have made their mind up and will make their judgment at the next election. I just don't see how continuing to hammer this in the hopes of forcing a resignation is healthy at this point. It really does feel like it's just about, again, people who want to get rid of Boris Johnson continuing to try to exact that. That's up to them. But surely as a country, we should move on at this point.
Yeah, I want to go back to Edwina on this. I mean, Tom seems to be echoing what you just said there. What is the use in continuing to beat the government up over bygones when there are big issues taking place? But surely now Boris Johnson is likely to face the Parliamentary Privileges Committee, who will be looking at the fact of whether or not he misled Parliament. And he was the one who reinvigorated the ministerial code when he came to office in 2019, when he took the top office in the country, and, you know, said himself that basically that it was essential to win back the trust of the public, and that a big part of that was going to be about accountability, transparency, honesty and leadership. And in the ministerial code, he makes himself the final arbiter of these things. Do you think now that he is going to be subject to a process that could well find him falling on his own sword?
Well, let's hope it all applies in exactly the same way to Sir Keir Starmer, who I think has taken the moral high ground on all of this and may well wish in weeks to come that he hadn't done that. I tell you what, I'm much more interested in what is happening in Ukraine. I have a Ukrainian family staying here. I'm much more interested in what is happening with the cost of living crisis. You know, most of the people I talk to are more worried about paying the gas bill than what the Prime Minister drank months, years ago, and then really not interested in the inside politics of the civil service. You know, some of the people who are going to be cross will include people like other civil servants who didn't go to parties and who worked very, very hard indeed. But in the end, you know, our institutions, all our institutions have taken a hell of a bashing in recent years. The Metropolitan Police, of which my husband was for many, many years, for over 30 years, a distinguished member. Parliament itself, the expenses scandal, which affected all the parliamentarians, a whole host of things. In the end, of course, if you look at results, what you find is we came out of COVID with the best vaccine programme in the world. We are coming through the whole energy crisis with the most diverse energy programme that Europe has seen. We are helping in Ukraine in a way that everybody in Ukraine is saying thank you. They're thrilled to bits that we are actually leading the pack on that. There are a whole host of other issues that I want to see carried forward. I couldn't give a toss what a bunch of MPs actually says or does or reports again on this. It demonstrates that they haven't got their act together. They haven't got their priorities. They really ought to be concentrating on other issues, which are much more important for the life of the country, for the freedom of Europe, and for the welfare of our citizens.
A Conservative MP for, I think, about 14 years. The Prime Minister will be facing the 1922 committee about 5 p.m. this evening, the Tory backbenchers. What sort of reception do you think he'll get? I was surprised that so far in the Commons, when he was making his statement, there were almost no big Tory beast backbenchers there. No Theresa May, no David Davis, no Steve Baker. Where were they?
Oh, hooray. Hooray. I mean, I don't think Theresa May has covered herself in glory in recent weeks. There's something a bit tacky about a retired Prime Minister standing up and criticising the existing Prime Minister. She knows perfectly well how difficult the job is, and she ought to be giving him some support. It would have been very nice indeed if she had been there and said, Mr. Speaker, does the House share my view that perhaps it's time to move on from all of this, because that's what my constituents are saying down in Kent or wherever it is. That would be helpful. If she can't be helpful, she's best be silent. Most of them actually have fought battles in the past. They fought battles over Brexit, which they lost. A lot of this is just to do with Brexit. A lot of it is to do with wanting to get rid of the Prime Minister that brought us Brexit. A lot of it is to do with getting revenge. And with a bit of luck, they're not going to succeed.
Edwina Curry, Tom Slater, thank you ever so much. We will be continuing this conversation. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, lots more to say about Sue Gray's report with our panel of guests.
Time now for a short break and a check on the weather. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a cool and cloudy day so far, and we keep a keen breeze during the rest of the day with further showers, but there will be some brighter spells making an appearance later, particularly towards the northwest as a weather front drifts through. And the isobars at the moment fairly tightly packed and seasonably breezy for May, and that's making it feel cool out there. But at least the more persistent rain eases during the rest of the day. The cloud breaks up. Clear spells as we go through the first part of the night, particularly towards Scotland, northern and eastern England, eastern parts of Wales as well. However, by the end of the night, well, further rain arrives into Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. 9 to 11 Celsius here, 12 in the south, 7 or 8 for northern Scotland, where we keep showers going through much of the night, along with a blustery breeze. But it's a damp start for Northern Ireland, for southern and central Scotland, and then the rain sinks into northern England, North Wales, where it will be heavy at times. Eventually, this feature weakens, so it's light and patchy rain for many by the end of the afternoon. And really, it's affecting central parts, drier and brighter to the south, 22 Celsius in London, and staying windy in the north. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing bright spells and showers north of the central belt, where, well, the winds will be reaching gale force around exposed coasts. The showers keep going through Thursday night in the north of Scotland, 1 or 2 drifting further south. But for the rest of the UK, clear spells fairly extensively. And as a result, temperatures in places dipping into the single figures. But the far south stays mild because of a bit more cloud here. The cloud at least slower to clear, but widespread sunshine actually on Friday morning. Cloudier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still windy here with further showers in the far north. But even those showers ease away on Saturday as high pressure builds from the south. We're going to see sunny spells for most, and it's going to feel warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every every morning from 6 o'clock. We'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News.
And me, Liam Halligan, for special coverage of Sue Gray's report into parties held in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown.
Well, let's go back to Westminster now and talk to Labour MP for Birmingham, Selly Oak, Steve McCabe. Steve, I mean, it seems to me Labour are trying to make hay while the sun shines, but you're in a pretty difficult situation, aren't you, when your own leader is also currently under investigation by Durham police for potentially bending the rules?
Well, today is about the Sue Gray report. It's got nothing to do with Keir Starmer. But Sir Keir was very clear. He said that if there's any shadow cast against him, then he'll resign.
About this Privileges Committee, what's the procedure? When's it going to happen? Of course, the Labour chair of the Privileges Committee, Chris Bryant, has had to recuse himself because he's already publicly criticised the Prime Minister. So when is that process likely to get going? How long is this going to drag on for?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to drag on for a long time. I'm not at all clear how quickly the Privileges Committee will get to deal with this. But, you know, the Prime Minister did have an opportunity to try and draw a line under it today. Instead, he decided to do more of the same. Pretend he didn't know about things that he must have known about. I mean, this is a man who says he's got his finger on the pulse. He can deal with Russia, he can deal with the energy prices, he can deal with the cost of living crisis, but he doesn't know when a party's happening 2 feet away from him, or when people are getting drunk and out of control.
Saying that you just said that it's likely to drag on for a long time. My understanding is the Privileges Committee seems to need to be reformed with new members joining, and then they'll decide when they want to begin. That would probably be after summer recess, so in the autumn. It could, I don't know, potentially go on until Christmas. Is it surely not therefore navel-gazing and rather politically indulgent to keep focusing on Partygate when, as you rightly say, there are some major issues that those who sit in the Palace of Westminster need to be discussing right now, not bygones where people had booze at Downing Street?
Well, the only reason it's dragged on this long is because we've got a Prime Minister who hasn't told the truth. We've got a Prime Minister who, in order to save his own neck, has decided to trash his own reputation, trash the reputation of Parliament, and trash the reputation of his government. He's the reason it's dragging on. If he'd done the honourable thing, admitted that he was in the wrong and gone like every other predecessor would have done, then we wouldn't be in this position, would we?
But surely it's within Labour Party's gift to potentially call off their dogs and let the man be judged now by his record in office and say to him, look, you've clearly messed up, you're not going anywhere, let that hang on your head, your reputation's been damaged, now it's time to run the country like an adult.
But his record in office is that this is a man who thinks he makes laws for everyone else, but not for him. This is a man who thinks he is above the law. This is a man who says, I take responsibility, and then takes absolutely no responsibility. This is a man you cannot rely on to have in charge.
Stephen Kay, Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, thanks for joining us. Let's go back to former Conservative MP and Minister Edwina Currie. Edwina, excuse me, at what point does the political and media class start to look ridiculous carrying on with this issue?
Well, I think they start to look irrelevant, and that's a shame. I mean, we've just had a distinguished Labour MP speaking. I would want to hear from him what he thinks about the RMT union's vote to call everybody out on strike. What about the millions of people that rely on the trains to get to work or to get to school or to get to college? What about people whose holidays are going to be ruined because they can't get a train or the train is cancelled? You know, no trains after 7 o'clock in the evening. That's going to be great for people who have to work shifts. Somewhere along the line, there's a totally relevance developing. It is so much easier, Liam, to attack an individual, particularly a prominent individual like the Prime Minister, than it is to tackle complex issues that might require a little bit of courage. And the Labour Party should think long and hard about it, because in the end, if they are silent in the face of the intimidation being produced by a trade union like the RMT and its membership, then they are silent in the face of something that really affects the lives of everybody in this country. I would much rather Parliament be debating that, or debating how people are going to pay for the gas bill, or how the government can mitigate the effects of the Russians hanging on to all their gas and their oil, and the effect that that's having on prices, not just through Europe, it's actually having an effect right through the world. And there are a whole range of other issues. You know, how long do you want to give me? I can think of far, far more important things like that our 600 plus MPs should be debating.
Thank you, Edwina. Tom, I mean, therefore, don't you think it's a useful distraction for both sides, isn't it? Because as much as the government don't seem to be tackling the big issues that are really concerning the public right now, Labour don't seem to have solutions either. And the more we seem to waste time focusing on people drinking 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whatever, the less we're actually focusing on what the government's not doing.
No, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, also this week, we had another much more serious report in relation to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, for instance. Really serious, not just technical, but moral failures on behalf of the government. You know, planes leaving Kabul with only a couple of humans on it because Pen Farthing's animals apparently jumped the queue. These are the sorts of things that, if we want to talk about the government fundamentally mishandling things, then go for it. I think not just with the Labour Party, but also with the media as well, present company excluded. It's easy, this. It's moralism, it's screaming liar at people, and it's attacking Boris Johnson, which a large sections of the media quite enjoy, fair enough. But there's so much going on in the world right now, as Edwina was just saying. This is almost just, this is something that you can just easily get het up about, whilst these big questions that a lot of people really don't have a proper answer to, you can just push them to one side. We really have to get past this, and I can't be the only one who was, you know, reading the commentary, flicking on the mainstream broadcasters today, thinking you were in a parallel universe where the same lame scandal was just replaying itself over and over again.
Tom Slater of Spike Magazine. Edwina Currie, thanks so much for joining us. You are with GB News, TV and DAB plus digital radio. Coming up, we're heading to Uxbridge, the Prime Minister's own constituency there in West London, for reaction to that Sue Gray report. That's after the GB News headlines once more with Rosie Wright.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. And let's give you an overview of what else is happening outside of the world of immediate politics. A woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a 1-year-old boy that she was hoping to adopt. Laura Castle reported that Leyland James Corkill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died the following day from catastrophic head injuries. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. Retired doctor Krishna Singh has been jailed for 12 years for sexually assaulting 47 patients over a period of 34 years. The 72-year-old's victims include pregnant women, a rape survivor, and 4 girls under the age of 16. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register. The RMT union is warning that the UK is facing its biggest rail strike in modern history after members overwhelmingly voted in favour of industrial action. Well, it's potentially going to cause major travel disruption, but the RMT has told GB News the action won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. The government has approved the sale of Chelsea Football Club, saying it's satisfied the full proceeds will not benefit Roman Abramovich, who was sanctioned following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The money will be set aside to support victims of the war. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.250 to the dollar and 1.173 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,480 and 45 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome back. You're watching GB News TV, DAB+ digital radio and online. We're continuing our coverage of Sue Gray's report into parties held in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown.
Yeah, joining us now is the Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, Jonathan Goulis. Jonathan, fantastic to have you on. So Boris Johnson is yet to make a statement to the media. He has stood up and addressed fellow parliamentarians, saying that he will take full responsibility, but then in the same breath kind of said, well, I wasn't there and it wasn't my fault. Has he done enough of a mea culpa? And are you confident, actually, that enough heads have rolled for what we found out went on during lockdown?
I think the Prime Minister's done the right thing and repeatedly apologised from the dispatch box, because understandably there will be people in the country who are angry and upset. But he was also right to make the changes Sue Gray recommended in her earlier reports. And Sue Gray's even welcomed in this most recent one that she's happy to see those changes are happening and underway and they are looking positive. And now what we need to do is move on. We need to talk about the cost of living. We need to talk and focus on rising inflation. We need to make sure that levelling up, a key pledge in the election in the seat where I represent Stoke-on-Trent North, Kisgrave and Tork, is delivered.
Jonathan, what's going to happen at the 1922 committee at 5 o'clock? Backbench Tory MPs. I was surprised how few big Tory beasts were in the chamber for the Prime Minister's statement earlier.
There'll just be colleagues getting together again, talking. I have no idea what anyone's planning on saying. I'll be going along just to listen, and then I'll be heading back to my constituency. But I'm sure you guys will find out, because it tends to get out quicker than I get out the room, what's going on inside the 1922.
I mean, you say that it's time to move on. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But the fact of the matter is he's going to be hauled in front of the Privileges Committee, isn't he? And that committee also needs to be staffed up. And seems a bit of a poisoned chalice. Not many Tory MPs wanting to sit on that. And they have to make up 4 of the 7 who will ultimately decide the fate of the Prime Minister.
There's a lot of colleagues who are incredibly fantastic parliamentarians who obviously want to make sure that democracy is upheld, that scrutiny is done properly, and that they will act with complete independence of mind. They won't be, led a certain way because of their party label. They'll want to make sure that the people feel that they've got the answers to those questions. You are indeed correct, the Privileges Committee will be underway. That's something that now Westminster can focus on. But I think what the people that I'm proud to represent, that your viewers, that I know you've been talking about, want us to focus on, are those really big challenges. And I hope to hear in the coming days what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are going to be doing to further help with the cost of living, adding to the £22 billion worth of support we've already had out.
Jonathan Gallis, thank you very much for joining us, Tory MP for Stoke-on-Trent.
Well, we can now also talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, well, people said this was going to be the difficult one. Everyone was waiting with bated breath for the Gray report, and, well, it does make for some pretty spicy reading, doesn't it? But is the sense, do you think, in that building behind you, one that, well, the worst is over now?
Well, quite potentially. It does feel like there is a less fevered pitch in Westminster than there was just several months ago. The Prime Minister seeming safer amongst his colleagues than many would have expected. Now, potentially that's to do with other factors, other issues going on in the world, but also potentially it's because looking at the detail of the Sue Gray report, there is a differentiation that can be made. Gone are the muddled reports of who was at which event and whether the Prime Minister himself sang karaoke or passed out, broke a swing or left at 4 a.m. No, it's clear now that what the Prime Minister himself was up to, and indeed what the Metropolitan Police have assessed the Prime Minister as having been up to, was rather more muted than some of those more junior members of staff, members of the civil service, but also political advisers. Those seemed to be the parties and indeed the events that were most gratuitous to many, that made the biggest headlines. So I think that distinction is important, and clearly the photographs are also important, none of which seem particularly that different to that now famous photograph of Sir Keir Starmer swigging a beer in Durham Miners Hall. But interestingly, what the Prime Minister was saying today in Parliament was something he was only able to say for the first time. He started his statement by setting out the context in which the last 24 months took place, and how on 8 individual days over the course of over 600 days, wrongdoing was assessed to have been done. And he spoke about the context, which is important, how Downing Street is not just that little door that you can see behind me, but it is in fact a sprawling complex. And actually, if we pan the camera round, we can just show the scale of everything, which isn't often seen on television news. Not just the shining door of number 10, but of course connecting through to number 11 and number 12 beyond that. 5 floors of the complex. And indeed, if we swing right back round, it's not just number 10, 11 and 12, but also connects through and round to Whitehall, connects to number 9 as well. 5,300 square metres in total across this complex. Many hundreds of offices, many hundreds of individuals. So that is the context in which we are talking about 8 days of events over the course of 600 days that have been deemed to have broken rules. And it's important, I think, to understand that context when talking about exactly what went on behind those Downing Street gates, what went on in what is not that looked into area, I suppose, of our politics.
Tom Harwood, stay with us. We're going to bring Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, back into the conversation. Let's broaden it out a little bit here. We're really, been looking at the close detail of Sue Gray's report for a while now. But let's look at the bigger political picture here. Prime Minister Boris Johnson faces a really tough set of circumstances. The cost of living crisis, inflation's 9%, it's going to go to 10%, and that's the consumer price index. For most people, their lived experience, if I can use that phrase, of inflation is deep into double digits. We've got a recession coming down the track, potentially. Can he really recover? Do you think he can ever properly put Partygate behind him, or is it going to dog him all the way to the next general election?
It seems like the damage has been done. I mean, the one thing that he's got in his favour is that the alternatives, both within his own party and across the other side of the House of Commons, are not particularly enticing at this point in time. If you look at the polls and the focus groups, he's become a kind of almost more of a joke in many people's eyes. It's just, they're not furious about it, but he's a bit sense of yesterday's man. I just feel like, especially looking through some of the details that we've been talking about there, I think one thing that he could do, will it overcome his deficit with those voters who've gone off him? Probably not, is obviously he's made enough apologies. He could say, look, rules were broken, he accepts that now, and then say the 120,000 people who in England and Wales alone were issued with these fixed penalty notices, some of which for doing no worse than people in 10 Downing Street have been accused of. That could be something, I think, to try and move this conversation on. Will he do it? I'm not sure. Will it help? Probably not. But I think at least that would allow more of a sense that you could turn the page at this point.
Yeah, well, former Brexit Secretary David Davis memorably called on Boris Johnson to go during PMQs earlier this year. Well, speaking to Gloria De Piero shortly before the Sue Gray report was published, he says he has no regrets about that. Let's have a look.
Earlier this year, since we're on to Boris Johnson, it was one of those breathtaking moments in Prime Minister's Question Time when you said to the Prime Minister, in the name of God, go. Was that a mistake?
No, not at all. I mean, look, when I change my mind, I'll let you know. I'll come on your programme and tell you. but what happened that morning, and I decided that morning, I was on my exercise bike. My morning starts with 10 minutes on the exercise bike, 10 minutes on the rowing machine, and I watch the night before's news. Because I don't get home often until after the news. So I always record it, so I watch the night before's news. And I watched the Beth Rigby interview when he appeared to blame his subordinates. They didn't tell me, all that stuff. Now, I was brought up in business and in military and in politics and as a minister. You don't blame your subordinates. You shoulder the responsibility. I think I may even use that phrase in the intervention. That you shoulder the responsibility for your own actions. And that was the point at which I thought it had just gone too far. I've been defending him up until then. I thought, if he doesn't go, then we'll have a death of 1,000. In fact, I actually gave an interview. I said, death of 1,000 cuts. The blame will spread to other cabinet ministers. Then it'll spread to the rest of government. Then it'll spread to the rest of the party. And it'll go on till Christmas. Well, so far, every single one of my predictions has been right, And the bit that people forget about about that quote was the first bit, because it was a quote from Cromwell. Eventually, it was actually a quote of a quote from Cromwell, a quote by one of Churchill's supporters, and then from Cromwell. And the first bit is, you sat there too long for all the good you have done. I wasn't denying he'd done a lot of good, that he delivered Brexit and all these things and got us through COVID. I had my disputes about that, but never mind. And it's, you've sat there too long for all the good you've done. You've done so much good, don't blight it. And that was my basic line. And that was it. And that was the reason. I don't regret it. I had 1,000 enemies the next day, or later that day. But since then I've got 1 million supporters. I mean, it's quite plain. Nobody no ordinary person. I mean, outside the Boris's circle, of course they cross me. They would be wrong not to be. But on the doorstep, on the train, in the streets, in the tea room, everywhere, people say, actually, you were right.
Former Brexit Secretary David Davis there talking to Gloria De Piero, and you can watch Gloria's full interview with David Davis tomorrow at 12:35 on her regular show, The Briefing.
Well, earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab spoke to broadcasters following Boris Johnson's statement. He was asked how the PM could not know about what was happening within his own team.
Well, I think, first of all, the Sue Gray report now issued in its final version has elucidated some of the facts that were already known, but cast its assessment of those facts. The Prime Minister's been very clear. Things happened that shouldn't have happened. He's apologised again today. The other point Sue Gray made is that there have been big changes at Number 10. The permanent secretary appointed because, frankly, Number 10 is now the size of a government department. The management structure has changed. Big changes have been made at the senior level. And Sue Gray welcomed those changes and said they needed time to bed in. So I think it's important that we had that transparency. I think it's important that the Prime Minister came and answered questions right the way through from everyone that wished to answer those questions. And of course, as he also said, we're now getting on with the job which I suspect most voters want us to get on with, on the cost of living, dealing with the situation in Ukraine, and we've been talking about victims and our crime-fighting agenda today as well.
The Prime Minister keeps saying there was only one event in which he was caught breaking the laws, which was his birthday bash, but that's a criminal level of threshold. That is at the threshold at which we should judge governments.
Well, we can also talk now to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, I mean, we've seen David Davis there reaffirming that he would continue to suggest that Boris Johnson should leave. There have been a few outspoken critics of the Prime Minister, but what is the sense, what are the whispers in the corridors of power of who thinks that Boris can possibly survive this and therefore have licked their fingers, stuck it up in the wind and thought, I'm not going to do anything, and those that think, well, best to get him out before it all goes wrong for the lot of us?
Yes, whilst many people are saying, of course, the Prime Minister is safer than he was a month or two ago, that's not to say that the Prime Minister is completely safe, and that's not to say that his standing has not been damaged, or indeed has been damaged by this event and by this entire 6 months of Partygate stories and 3 investigations. So, yes, I think it is clear there are a number of Conservative MPs who are deeply upset with the Prime Minister. However, probably not enough to tip it over into a formal leadership contest, not at this stage anyway. Now, there's one more point of danger for the Prime Minister. It seems like he's managed to sort of limp over this Sue Gray hurdle. No longer can people say, you have to wait for the Sue Gray report before I'll decide. It does seem like now people are thinking, well, he's probably just about managed to squeak through. But there is one more investigation, of course. We had the Met Police investigation. We had, of course, the Sue Gray investigation. And now there's the Privileges Committee investigation, which will determine whether or not the Prime Minister misled the House, and here's the key bit, intentionally. If it's found that the Prime Minister intentionally led the House, well, then by the words of the Ministerial Code, he will have to resign. However, if the Privileges Committee decides that the Prime Minister did not intentionally mislead the House when he said that he did not believe that there was rule-breaking going on in Number 10, if that was a genuine error of his, if he genuinely did not believe that there was rule-breaking going on in Number 10 and it came as news to him, well, then he will not have intentionally misled the House. Indeed, today he corrected the record at the dispatch box in the House. And if he gets over that hurdle, well, then potentially he's safer still. However, if the Privileges Committee finds against him, and I hasten to add in this case the Privileges Committee does have a majority of Conservative MPs on it, albeit a similar committee, of course, with a Conservative majority, did find against the Conservative MP Owen Paterson not that long ago, so that isn't necessarily to say that this committee will automatically find in favour of the Prime Minister. But if it does, he may be safer. If it doesn't, he may be very much in jeopardy. So there is still that further hurdle to come. But as things stand in Westminster, it does seem to be that is that just general feeling that the Prime Minister has, in those words of the former Prime Minister David Cameron, been a bit of a greased piglet in this instance and squeaked through.
Greased piglet. Tom Harwood, GB News political correspondent, thanks for joining us. Let's listen again to what Boris Johnson had to say in the House of Commons earlier today.
Clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules, and they fell foul of the rules. I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled.
Well, there is the Prime Minister, perhaps correcting Parliament when he said earlier that there weren't any parties at number 10. And as Tom Harwood was saying, going back to Tom Slater now, that the Privileges Committee need to find out if the Prime Minister misled Parliament. But it does say here that correcting any inadvertent error must be done at the earliest opportunity. Well, it seems to have taken until today for him to say, before I said there was definitely no rule breaking, but perhaps I don't know because I wasn't there.
Well, it's all going to rest on some very fine, quite subjective distinctions, I think it's fair to say, amongst the few people who are willing to go out and actually defend the actions of number 10, not just, call for us to move on. We'll say, when is a party a party? There's a similar thing where lockdown rules are concerned, I think, where, when does people sat cheek by jowl all day, you introduce some fizz and cheese into the situation, suddenly it's a public health nightmare. I think that ambiguity, particularly on the question of was it a party, was I aware, the fact that a lot of these things, these kind of wine time Fridays would kick off after Boris Johnson was usually dispatched to Chequers on a Friday night, will be the quite shaky ground on which he'll try to mount some sort of defence in front of the Privileges Committee. But it does seem to be like that's the moment of danger for him now. It's not going to come from his own MPs necessarily. He's definitely not going to resign under the force of this scandal itself. It's the question about what happens at that particular committee that now everyone's attention is going to move towards.
I have to say, Tom, obviously there is a lot of anger among some people, and the political and media class is absolutely obsessed with this. Unless I'm losing all my instinct, I think most people are pulling their hair out. Talk about the cost of living crisis, talk about the war in Ukraine, talk about how we're going to pay our energy bills, talk about the UK heading for recession, talk about taxation, talk about things that really, really matters to people.
Well, joining us now on the show is the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, Steve Reid. Steve, fantastic to have you on. What do you take from this whole situation? I mean, Liam there saying that it's probable that most of the country want to move on now. It does seem a big distraction, but there are huge issues at stake facing the country right now. Do you think it's time to call off the dog so the government can get back on to governing?
Well, we certainly need to move on and focus on the issues that matter, but the main obstacle to doing that is Boris Johnson himself. It's his behaviour over the period of the lockdown that has been so graphically detailed in Sue Gray's report, and then his attempts to cover it up for the last 6 months that has got us to where we are today. We absolutely need to be talking about the cost of living crisis and the impact of 15 Tory tax hikes since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister are having on people's living standards. But for as long as we have a Prime Minister whose primary objective is to save his own skin, not to focus on what matters to the British people, we cannot move on. And that's why I hope if he continues to refuse to resign, that Conservative MPs will remove him.
Steve, may I ask you, what do you think about the RMT union calling for strike action, bringing, in the words of their General Secretary, the country to a standstill?
A strike of that kind right now is the absolute last thing that we need. And what I'd like the government to do, if they could focus for a moment on stopping covering up Boris Johnson's law breaking, is to bring all sides together, the railways, the unions, the government together, and make sure this strike doesn't go ahead, because it's going to cause immense pain and disruption to people who are already hurting so much because of the government's failure with the economy.
Steve Reid, thank you ever so much. Shadow Secretary of State for Justice there. That's about it for now. I'm back tomorrow for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you so much to Tom Slater from Spikes for joining me, and Liam Gallagher, who has kept me good company for the past hour. The briefing is next, but first, it's time for the weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a cool and cloudy day so far, and we keep a keen breeze during the rest of the day with further showers, but there will be some brighter spells making an appearance later, particularly towards the northwest as a weather front drifts through. And the isobars at the moment fairly tightly packed and seasonably breezy for May. and that's making it feel cool out there. But at least the more persistent rain eases during the rest of the day. The cloud breaks up, clear spells as we go through the first part of the night, particularly towards Scotland, northern and eastern England, eastern parts of Wales as well. However, by the end of the night, well, further rain arrives into Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. 9 to 11 Celsius here, 12 in the south, 7 or 8 for northern Scotland, where we keep showers going through much of the night, along with a blustery breeze. But it's a damp start for Northern Ireland, for southern and central Scotland, and then the rain sinks into northern England, North Wales, where it will be heavy at times. Eventually, this feature weakens, so it's light and patchy rain for many by the end of the afternoon, and really it's affecting central parts. Drier and brighter to the south, 22 Celsius in London, and staying windy in the north, Scotland and Northern Ireland.